Hello, horror fans. Today I will tell you a scary story that will shock you. I warn you, children, stay away from the screens. This story is full of paranormal events.
It was a night like any other, calm and still, the rain finally having passed and leaving the world damp and quiet. I stood with my friends, staring into the mouth of the cave, an ancient, looming structure that had been the subject of many rumors and tales. They were all things of legend, of course, but I never quite understood why it drew so many of us in, despite the warnings. This place, hidden in the mountain range, was always whispered about, but no one really spoke of it. It was just there, waiting. "Let's see what it's all about," I said. I had always been the bold one, the one willing to venture where others feared to go. But that night, I had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. The entrance to the cave was jagged, almost like teeth, and as I stepped inside, a shiver ran down my spine. The air was thick with moisture, and the dim torchlight barely touched the walls, casting strange shadows that twisted and turned in every direction. It felt alive, almost as if the cave was breathing, pulsing with an energy that sent a cold, prickling sensation across my skin. We were all talking, trying to make light of the situation, but the further we went, the more that light-hearted chatter began to fade. A deep, eerie silence settled over us, only the sound of our footsteps echoing off the stone walls. It wasn't long before I began to feel it, the feeling of being watched. There was no particular reason for it, nothing I could point to, but the deeper we ventured into the cave, the more it felt like something was following us. I wasn't sure if it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but it felt as though the shadows themselves were moving, closing in around us. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see something there, but there was nothing. A cold gust of air rushed through the cave, sending the flames of our torches flickering wildly. For a brief moment, the cave was lit only by the faint, ghostly glow of the torchlight bouncing off the damp walls, casting strange, elongated shadows. The fog that seemed to emanate from the ground swirled around us, wrapping itself around our legs, making the already narrow passage feel even more confined. The deeper we went, the fog thickened, and the atmosphere became stifling. The walls felt closer, pressing in on us. "Are you sure this is safe?" one of my friends asked, his voice shaking slightly. I hesitated for a moment. "It's just a cave," I replied, trying to sound reassuring, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. We continued on, but the unease gnawed at me, growing with each step. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of our breathing and the occasional drip of water from the cave's ceiling. As we moved further into the depths, I began to notice strange markings on the walls, symbols etched into the rock, worn and faded by time. They were old, ancient even, but they seemed to pulse with an energy that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Then, I heard it first. It was a whisper, barely audible over the sound of our movements. But it was unmistakable. A low, guttural whisper, as if something, was calling out from the depths of the cave. My heart began to race, and I instinctively reached for my flashlight, shining it into the dark recesses of the cave, but there was nothing there. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. My friends nodded, their faces pale. "Yeah, what the hell was that?" one of them replied. We stood frozen for a moment, listening, but there was nothing. Just the oppressive silence and the whispering wind that seemed to come from nowhere. My skin prickled, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise as the air around us grew colder. We kept walking, but I noticed something strange. Every time we took a step, the cave seemed to stretch, as though it were changing shape. The walls closed in, the floor beneath our feet shifted, and the tunnel seemed to narrow. It was like the cave was alive, moving around us, shifting its form in response to our presence. I glanced at my friends, but their faces were just as filled with unease as mine. "That's not normal," one of them said, his voice trembling. "We should turn back." I didn't argue. Something wasn't right, and the whispers were growing louder now, more insistent. It felt like the cave itself was trying to trap us, pulling us deeper and deeper into its depths. The further we went, the more the air seemed to thicken, the fog curling around our feet like tendrils, dragging us down. The whispering grew louder, more distinct. I could hear words now, though they were muffled and indistinct, as though they were coming from just out of reach, like something, or someone, was speaking from the very walls of the cave. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was angry. It was hungry, and then I saw it dot a shadow, lurking in the distance, barely visible through the fog. It was tall, impossibly tall, its form shrouded in darkness. For a moment, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but then it moved. Slowly, deliberately, it moved toward us, the whispers grew louder, and I felt a cold chill wash over me. I turned to my friends, my voice barely more than a hoarse whisper, "We need to get out of here. Now." But it was too late. The shadow was upon us, and with it came the unmistakable presence of something evil, something ancient and cruel. The Sandman. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew one thing: there was no escaping it. The cave had chosen us, and we were going to pay the price for daring to enter its depths. The fog around us thickened like a living thing, curling in on itself, hiding everything from sight but the faint flicker of our torches. My breath came in short, panicked bursts, the cold air biting at my skin, seeping into my bones. The cave felt like it was closing in, pressing on me from all sides. And that shadow, those eyes, that presence, it had moved closer. I wasn't sure how long we stood there, frozen in place, staring at the dark shape, but it seemed like an eternity. The whispering had stopped, but in its place, an eerie silence had fallen over us. The air felt thick, suffocating, as if the cave itself were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen, and then, the whisper returned. But this time, it was different. It wasn't a distant murmur anymore. It was right next to us, as if something, or someone, was standing just out of reach. I could feel it, the weight of its presence pressing on me, the icy fingers of fear curling around my throat. My legs felt heavy, like they were made of stone, and I couldn't move, couldn't tear my eyes away from that shadow. The shape, barely visible in the fog, was getting closer. Its outline was distorted, unnatural, like it was made of shadows themselves. It was tall, taller than anything human, and I could make out the faintest details as it approached. The silhouette of a figure, draped in darkness, with long, outstretched limbs. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its eyes, cold, hungry, and watching me, watching all of us. Who is that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. One of my friends, Jason, I think, trembled beside me. "That's not possible. That's not real." But it was. It was real. The figure stepped forward, its movement unnaturally slow, almost deliberate, like it was savoring our fear. As it neared, I saw something else, a trail of blood, dark and thick, dripping from its fingers, staining the stone floor beneath it. The blood glistened in the torchlight, reflecting the dim flames like it had been there for centuries, or perhaps longer. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body was paralyzed with fear. My mind screamed at me to move, to do something, anything, but I couldn't. I was trapped, caught in the grip of whatever nightmare was unfolding before me, and then it spoke. Their voice was low, guttural, like the sound of stone grinding against stone. But there was something else in it, a deep, almost melodic whisper that seemed to echo in my skull. "You shouldn't have come here," it said. The words were cold, without mercy, and they sent a shock of terror through me. I wanted to look away, to escape, but I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, caught in its gaze. "Please," I croaked, my voice barely more than a breath. We didn't mean to, but the Sandman, if that's even what it was, didn't care. It didn't need us to beg for mercy. Its eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness, burned into me, and I felt the crushing weight of its presence. It was ancient, older than time itself, and it was hungry. "You are mine now," it whispered, its voice sending chills down my spine. "All of you." The world around me seemed to bend and warp as the Sandman raised a hand, long and bony, stained with blood. I saw its fingers twitch, and before I could react, I felt the ground beneath me shift. The cave trembled, the walls groaning as if they, too, were alive, and the fog seemed to rise higher, wrapping itself around us like a tightening noose. It was in that moment that I understood the true nature of the cave. It wasn't just a cave. It was a prison. A prison built to contain the Sandman, to hold him in place. And we had unwittingly freed him. The Sandman's smile, or what passed for a smile, was the last thing I saw before everything went black. I woke up later, disoriented and gasping for air. The fog was still there, swirling around me, but the cave felt different now. The shadows were deeper, more oppressive, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. I sat up, my head spinning, and looked around. My friends were nowhere to be seen. Guys, I called, my voice cracking as I struggled to my feet. Jason? Claire? But there was no answer. The cave was silent now, except for the faint sound of dripping water and the distant, unsettling echoes of something shifting in the darkness. I stumbled forward, my heart racing in my chest, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The Sandman, it wasn't a myth. It wasn't just a story. It was real. I didn't know what I was walking into, but I knew I couldn't stay in this place. I had to find my friends. I had to escape, but deep down, a part of me knew that it wasn't going to be that easy. As I ventured deeper into the cave, the air grew colder, and the fog thicker. The torchlight flickered erratically, casting long, sinister shadows against the walls. The whispers were back, too, this time louder, more urgent. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, like the walls themselves were speaking. I could hear them now, faint, hollow voices, calling my name. I spun around, trying to see where they were coming from, but there was nothing. The cave was empty, silent, save for the whispers. The ground beneath my feet felt unstable, like it might give way at any moment. I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep my sanity intact, and then, I heard it. A soft, almost inaudible sound, like the scraping of nails against stone. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. It was coming from behind me. Slowly, I turned, my breath catching in my throat. There, emerging from the fog, was the Sandman again. Its figure was even more grotesque now, its bloated form illuminated by the flickering torchlight. It was closer than before, its eyes glowing with an insatiable hunger. You thought you could escape, it whispered, its voice like a blade cutting through the air. But there is no escape. Not from me. I couldn't move. The fear that gripped my chest was suffocating, paralyzing, and the more I tried to fight it, the stronger it became. The Sandman's presence was overwhelming, filling the cave with a dark energy that felt as though it had existed for millennia, long before we'd ever stepped foot inside. The fog seemed to grow thicker, the air colder, and the cave felt alive, alive in a way that made every step, every breath, feel like a struggle. You can't outrun me, the Sandman's voice echoed from the darkness. You never could. I turned, trying to find an escape, but the shadows surrounded me, curling around the narrow passageways like tendrils. The walls seemed to close in, pressing down on me with an almost suffocating weight. It was as though the cave itself had become a living creature, intent on keeping me here, and it was all I could do to keep from suffocating under its oppressive grasp. Why are you doing this? I called out, my voice trembling. What do you want from us? The Sandman's form shifted, becoming clearer as it emerged from the mist. Its body was a grotesque mockery of human shape, its limbs unnaturally long and bony. Blood dripped from its fingers, leaving dark stains on the floor. The air around it seemed to warp and distort, and its eyes glowed with an eerie, otherworldly light, cold and hungry, as though it hadn't eaten in centuries. I've been waiting, the Sandman whispered, its voice rasping like dry leaves. Waiting for someone foolish enough to disturb me. You and your friends, you opened the door. You set me free. I shook my head, confusion swirling in my mind. We didn't open anything. We were just exploring. We didn't know. The Sandman's laughter echoed around the cave, hollow and cold, sending a shiver down my spine. You think I care about your ignorance, it hissed. This cave is a prison I've been bound in for as long as time itself. The cave, it's part of me. And now that you've entered, you've become part of it. There's no leaving. No escape. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The cave wasn't just a place, it was the Sandman's prison. It had been built to contain him, to trap him in a place of darkness and fog. And somehow, we had unleashed him. We had been the catalyst for his return. You won't survive this, the Sandman said, its voice growing more menacing with each word. I've watched countless souls wander these halls. And now, you're just another one. Another offering to the darkness. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let the Sandman claim me like he had claimed so many before. I had to do something, anything, to stop him. Without thinking, I reached for the torch at my side, holding it up to the creature's face. The flame flickered, casting long, jagged shadows, but for a moment, the Sandman recoiled. It was as if the light burned him, drove him back. If only for a second. That was my chance. I ran, heart pounding, my mind racing. I didn't know where I was going, I just needed to get away, to escape this nightmare. The cave stretched out before me, its winding passages twisting and turning like a labyrinth, and I could hear the Sandman's footsteps behind me, echoing in the darkness. The whispers were back, louder now, surrounding me, crawling into my ears. I could hear them, feel them, voices, ancient and cold, calling me, telling me to stop, telling me there was no escape. But I didn't listen. I couldn't. The walls seemed to move, to shift, as though they were closing in around me. The floor beneath my feet was uneven, treacherous, and I stumbled, barely catching myself before I fell. The fog thickened, and the air grew colder, so cold it felt like my breath was freezing in my chest. But I kept running. I didn't look back. I couldn't afford to. I could hear the Sandman's breath now, low and ragged, behind me, growing closer. The ground seemed to tremble with every step it took. I had to keep going, had to outrun it, but my legs were growing weaker, my body burning with exhaustion, and then, I saw it. A flicker of light. Faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a crack in the wall, a passage leading out of the cave. I surged forward, desperation fueling my every step, my heart racing as I reached the opening. The light grew brighter as I neared, and I could see the exit, just ahead. Freedom. Escape. But then, the Sandman's voice, low and deadly, stopped me in my tracks. You can't leave, it whispered. Not without me. I turned, and for the first time, I saw its face. It was horrific, a twisted, blooded mask of a creature, its eyes glowing with malice. It was close now, too close, and I could feel the heat of its presence burning through the cold. In that moment, I knew there was only one way out. I couldn't outrun it. I couldn't hide. The only way to survive was to confront it. With every ounce of strength I had left, I raised the torch and lunged at the Sandman, driving the flame into its chest. The creature recoiled, a horrible screech tearing from its throat as the fire burned into its flesh, searing it. For a moment, the cave trembled, the walls cracking as if the very earth were protesting the battle taking place, but the Sandman didn't stop. It fought back, thrashing and howling in rage, its blood splattering the walls as it clawed at me, its long, jagged fingers scraping across my skin. I stumbled, nearly falling, but I held on, pushing the torch deeper into its chest. Then, with a final, deafening scream, the Sandman collapsed, its body crumbling into dust and ash, vanishing into the fog. The cave trembled one last time, and then, everything went still. I stood there, panting, the torch still flickering in my hand. The fog began to dissipate, the darkness retreating, and I could see the cave stretching out before me. The oppressive weight of the place had lifted, and the silence was almost deafening. I made my way to the exit, my body aching, every step a struggle. But I kept moving. I didn't look back. When I finally stepped into the light, I knew that I had survived. But I also knew that the Sandman was not truly gone. He had been trapped once, and now he was free. There would always be another cave, another place, another dark corner of the world where he would wait, and I would never forget the horrors I had faced.